This is Elaine York, here to chat about Chapter 3 in our cognitive psychology class, sensation and perception. Sensation and perception are two different processes. Sensation is the process of taking in information from the world around us through our senses, vision, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And perception is the way that our brain organizes this information that we're taking in to tell us that the kitty is soft and that the bacon smells good and we can start digestion. So our senses have a lot to do with other bodily processes, which is cool. We had most of our time spent talking about the visual process. It was interesting to me that it has two different pathways to take the information from just our eyeballs to the back of our brain. This is where we process the information clear across the brain, which is cool, but probably because this part of the brain developed first, right? We've always had eyes, we've always had this part of the brain, so that kind of makes sense to me. But it does have two different pathways. The ventral pathway identifies objects and people, and the dorsal pathway identifies location or processes location, so we helps us navigate when like walking around the room so we don't stub our toe. The auditory sensation was an interesting one to read about. I thought specifically the way that we identify sounds in our immediate location using two different processes called the interaural intensity distance difference, which is how loud sound is from one ear compared to the other, and then the interaural time distance, which is the time it takes for a sound to hit in one ear to the other. And then we use those differences to process where we're hearing sounds from. The cone of confusion is when sounds are equidistant from our ears, so it could be anywhere above or below or in front of us. As long as it's equidistant, we can't really perceive it, so we'd have to turn our head to change the way that the sound is hitting our ears to figure that out. That was kind of cool. Touch was interesting. We have a couple of different ways to process touch. There's haptics, which is knowing where your limbs are in space without sight, which I thought sounded a lot like proprioception, which is also knowing where your body is and helps you maneuver and navigate the world. But I guess proprioception is joint specific. And then we use mechanoreceptors to figure out what kind of touch we're using so we can change the pressure that we're using to hold something, to tighten our grip or loosen it. The touch thresholds was interesting in that the smallest parts of our body have the smallest threshold, or the tightest threshold. So our lips, our fingers, hands, and toes have the smallest 2-point threshold, but they take up the biggest part in our sensory cortical cortex in our part of the brain. So in our brain, it maps out that our lips, our hands, our fingers are super big, but they're not. I think that's kind of interesting also. And I wonder if our brain maps it out different because we have more touch receptors here or a smaller threshold, or if we have a smaller threshold because our brain tells us to have one. I don't know what comes first, chicken or egg kind of thing. And then we talked about taste and smells, which we didn't have a lot of information in there. I thought it was interesting that the molecules that we use to identify tastes and odors are called tastants and odorants. They were definitely the easiest words for me to pronounce and remember in this chapter.